Now, the palace at Knossos was built much like a maze, a labyrinth, which of course many myths came out of. But when you look at the structure, all the passageways, all the unique rooms, there's much there that can be gleaned for the value of the wizard, the filling wizard who fills a kingdom emotionally. So we're going to look at how to confound a kingdom, and we're going to look at these ruins to understand how to have the effect that these ruins had. These ruins are still having an effect of awe and wonder upon everybody who ventures through them, even though they're only partially remaining. So the first thing to see is creating the feeling of division. The first division has to be between the country and the palace, and you can see a distinct line between those two worlds, because the wizards that built this structure were trying to separate it from the rest of the kingdom, because the ruler's mindset was to have a world in and of itself. The palace was a singular entity which powered the rest of the kingdom. So that line must be distinct, and you as the wizard must be able to feel that line. Inside that line, inside the palace and the building, you must have an overriding emotion. It must be awe or wonder, something wondrous and holistic that can really embody what the ruler is going for in the construction of this palace. If you look at the layout inside the structure itself, then you have all these individual rooms. Each of them you can put a particular emotional meaning into, and they also have to be connected in ways that make sense with the rooms next to them. So the whole building has a singular large-scale emotion that governs the whole palace, and then each individual room works within that larger whole and is interconnected within every other room around it. These are critical principles for any wizard to consider with anything they intend to build into the world. And you can see how each room itself has a feel to it. It has a meaning. And then there's these little doorways, which are transitional places where the individual who's walking through it knows, I'm going into another room, and there will be another meaning here, another distinct, valuable expression of this kingdom. And in your own heart, when you're building your emotional palace, you must have these kind of principles. You must have individual segments of emotion, and then you must have passageways that lead to other emotions. That's how a palace works, and that's also how the emotional palace inside yourself must also work. You are the connection as the wizard. So you build all these emotions, and then you must connect all those emotions. But it's more than just the divisions. You must also feel the depth. When you feel something, that's three-dimensional. So you can see in the palace, this black and white is a one-dimensional picture. However, the palace itself had up to 4 layers. So were there all these stairways that went up and down, and you had these layers that just added dimensionality to this structure. Why? So that it could be filled with even more diverse meaning. And in your own heart, you want to replicate this. You want to have levels and depth to each emotion, so you can have different levels of anger and different levels of joy and different modes of expression for each of those emotions. You need all those connections, you need all those different rooms for your emotions, and you want to have depth to each as well, much like the palace. So as you feel the divisions between your emotions inside of you, and you can plunge into the depth and rise to the surface of those emotions, the last thing you want to do is feel the disorientation. One of the toughest things about a wizard is you're going to transition between all these emotions. That's very disorienting for people. So in the palace, the rooms have a whole different feel to them, one room to another, and each time you go into a room, it's disorienting. So you want to make each room's meaning abundantly clear. You want to fill that room with such potent meaning that within a second of walking into it, there'll be that disorientation, but then immediately they'll grasp the meaning of what's happening. And you also want to consider what kind of connections you need to have. So you can see here there's a passage going down, a slender passage. So think of how water moves. It accelerates when it gets into a tight space, and then it's expecting something, as if a grand room were about to come, a grand lake, So when you build your emotions, and even if you build a palace, you want to utilize these principles. If you have a huge room, something glorious that you want the individual to behold, put a narrow passageway first. It builds excitement, anticipation, movement, and then they flood into the room and just become awed and wondered at what they discover. So consider these principles that we see in the ruins, have those divisions. You're basically making containers, and then you're putting your emotional depth into that container, and then you're feeling the disorientation, because you want to work on that connection. Don't make it be rough, don't make it be too jarring. You want it to be a natural transition from one emotion to another. So if we look at what's going on here, we can use a simple picture. Each of these glasses has a different color in it, and colors oftentimes symbolize emotions. So on the left you've got envy, that green envy, and then just to the right you've got the cool blue feeling of that chill, and then very red color in the middle, much like fire, maybe anger, and then something warm and comfortable in the orange, and then maybe like a sorrow, that darkness on the right. These are all good emotions, and as you practice as a wizard, this is how you start. You make individual containers, and you put individual emotions inside of them. Now, as your skill grows, you can move beyond just doing containers with one emotion, and you can start connecting them. You place something in between each container, and you feel how those emotions will bleed into one another. So, for example, if you want to mix together anger and love, those are two things that don't go very well together. However, you can figure it out, but you need that sensitivity. You've got to be able to feel, well, how does the anger complement the love, and how does the love complement the anger? How do they bleed together naturally? And if you have the patience, and if you have the skill for it, you'll figure it out. Now, as you grow more skilled at connecting all these different emotions within your emotional palace, then you can move on to the final stage, which is creating a fluid, ceaseless realm of ever-increasing undulation between all your emotions. And anybody who moves into this world is consumed by it. They become lost in your emotional creations as you're just taking them on this journey and this ride where it never seems to end. And there's always differentiation, and you're always defying the previous moment and taking them somewhere they haven't been before as you use all of the potency of your emotional divisions and depths, and it's really a whole encasing experience that you're creating for them. And you can just take this skill on forever and ever and ever with your mastery of it. So as we review what we see in the Palace of Ancient Times, you create the division, you create the depth, and you create the disorientation, because you want to make a world, an emotional world in and of itself. So as a wizard, confound your kingdom with your emotional palace.